Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, science fiction, fantasy, and espionage historical fiction. And I talk about games on the internet. I wanted to make sure to mention that last one. My very most recent book is called Ghost Station. It is a Cold War espionage novel about cryptographers in Berlin in 1961. And it is important to bring up because I'm talking about an espionage role playing game today. It is Cold Shadows. Doo-doo, by Gallant Knight Games, written by Alan Barr, who's super great. I have talked a lot about his games before. Here is the super fancy collector's edition, leather bound. Um, I love this game. I love Gallant Knight Games. This is the first time I've actually reviewed one on this channel. I will eventually be getting to a lot of them because they're fantastic. Let's talk about Cold Shadows. Cold Shadows is a spy game. And if you are, like I am, a fan of TV tropes, then you know that spy fiction comes in kind of two distinct flavors, which is dry martini and stale beer. James Bond, obviously, is a dry martini spy. He is dealing with espionage, but mostly he's just an action hero running around doing stuff. Uh, Stale beer spy stuff is more like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the spy who came in from the cold. Um, John le Carre is like the patron saint of this kind of espionage storytelling. And he was absolutely my inspiration when I was writing Ghost Station, and very clearly Gallant Knight Games' inspiration for Cold Shadows. It is absolutely a stale beer John le Carre style game, and it's awesome. If you aren't familiar with this kind of spy stuff, I would urge you to check out the recent miniseries produced by the BBC called Little Drummer Girl, which is based on one of John le Carre's more recent novels. Um, and it is fantastic. It is so good. But anyway, there you go. So one of the great things about Cold Shadows is that it is a very narrative game. Um, there are kind of three major schools of role-playing game theory. It's gamist, simulationist, and narrativist. A simulationist game is trying very hard to recreate the actual experience of using something. So if you play, there was a medieval sword fighting game years and years ago called The Riddle in the Steel. That's a simulationist game because what it was trying to do was accurately recreate the experience of a true sword fight. It was a really fascinating game. It had, written by and consulted on with a ton of actual experts in sword fighting. Something like Dungeons and Dragons is more gamist. You are playing a game in which it's kind of players against the GM, not really, but you have your stuff and you're trying to, it's more competitive in that sense. Narrativist game is one that spreads the narrative power around so that the game master, or in this game, literally just the narrator, has, they don't have full control over the story. Because the purpose is not control, the purpose is storytelling. And the characters are able to kind of gain control. The primary function of the primary game mechanic, let's say that, in Cold Shadows is called a risk. And a risk is not done to determine success or failure the way a dice roll is in Dungeons and Dragons or something like that. What a risk is, the dice roll is going to determine who gets to narrate the outcome, who has control over what happens next. And this is a very simple system. Gallant Knight Games kind of specializes in minimalist systems, and while this is more complex than its tiny D6 engine, it's still a very nice minimal system. So what it is you when you say you're going to take a risk, you define what it is you're trying to do, and then you and the narrator are going to figure out how many dice you get based on certain aspects that you have, based on certain virtues that you have, and things like that. So you'll end up with a handful of six-sided dice, right? And you take these dice, and you might have anywhere from 2, 3, 4, all the way up to maybe 7 or 8 of these dice. and then you roll them, you total them, add them all together, and if you hit at least a 10, you succeed. And that means that you are the one who gets to narrate the outcome. So let's say, for example, that you are trying to, I don't know, what's a very typical spy thing? You're trying to get information from somebody, right? You have met a contact in a shady alley somewhere, and you're trying to learn something valuable from them. Okay? So you will look at your virtues. You say, well, my charisma is pretty high, so I get these many dice, and I've got this other aspect that relates to this. I'm good at talking to people, so that's going to add some extra dice. Roll the whole pool, add them all up. If it's less than 10, the narrator's in charge. And the narrator can then just tell you what happens and say, well, he doesn't, give you the info that you want, or he lies to you, or whatever it is. If you win, then you can narrate everything and say, oh, well, he is going to tell me everything, or he's going to lie to me. You can do this as a player. Remember, your goal is not to win. Your goal is to tell a good story. And now, if you're unfamiliar with narrative games, this might seem very overwhelming the first time you play one. And I remember playing Cold Shadows, in fact, was one of the very first times one of my friends had experienced this. And it took him a while. It took him 2 or 3 rolls to really kind of figure out, I can just control this. I can make this up. And then, he won the next role that he was working on, and he started adding in all these extra story tales. It helps that I tend to play games with authors because they're very good storytellers, but anyone can do this, and it's a lot of fun. In a case like my example, where you were trying to get information out of somebody, it can be as simple as the player winning the role and saying, okay, this guy trusts me now, and he is going to tell me most of the details, but he's going to leave a few key ones out. And then you turn it back over to the game master, because the game master is the one sitting there with all the game notes. The game master is the one who knows what the secret plan is. And so because you had control and you said this person says they're going to tell me, the game master will tell you. Okay? And so a narrative game is really great. And there's a lot of them. A lot of the games that I pitch all the time. If you've heard me talk about 10 Candles or Fiasco, those are very narrative games in that the players kind of have control over the story in a way that you might not be familiar with from other ones. Anyway, so that's how it works. Cold Shadows has another great mechanic piled on top of that risk system, which is called wagers. So let's say that you have this pool of 7 or 8 dice. We're going to say 8 dice. 8 dice on average, you're going to absolutely blow away that target number of 10. You don't need all 8 dice. So what you can do is wager some of them. Let's say you hold back 3 of those dice. You're going to wager 3 dice. And you have your remaining pool of 5. You roll those. If they add up to 10, and they still have to hit 10 or your wager is lost, then not only do you succeed, but you succeed really, really well. You can give yourself extra things on top of that. If this is a contested roll like a combat, you can use those wagers to do more damage. If this is some other kind of roll where you're just trying to gain information or access, a secret, you're trying to infiltrate something, you're trying to decode something, you're trying to hack into a computer, whatever it is you're trying to do, you can use those wagers to do much better at it, to gain extra information, to gain extra advantages. You don't just sneak in, you say, you won, and so you get to sneak in and talk about that. But then you've got these extra wagers you can spend to gain extra cool things while you're doing it. So that's the whole dice system, right? Risks, wagers, contested rolls. It's very simple. It plays very quickly. And once you get into the rhythm of how a narrative game works, it becomes just an absolutely fascinating, incredibly engaging storytelling system. It's wonderful. The last thing that I want to mention, I very briefly mentioned combat, and that is done basically as pools of dice, and you're trying to outroll the other person and so on, get more wagers. Combat begins when somebody says strike. And this is very fast-paced and can be very lethal. In fact, the game includes an optional rule in which a silenced pistol, and when I've played this, I've added by extension like a silenced sniper rifle, will just instantly auto-kill, regardless of wagers, regardless of everything else. If you want to play a very deadly game, add in the silenced pistol rule. So basically, as soon as somebody says strike, there's no rolling for initiative. There's no, there's nothing else. You're talking to a bad guy, and as soon as somebody says strike, then you get to attack. And you will get a bonus because you go first, and you will probably, especially if you're using a concealed pistol, kill the person that you're talking to. So it can be a very deadly game. Just keep in mind that the narrator, all the Game Master characters, they can also strike. They can also be using silenced pistols. So you have to be very careful. What that does in practice is it makes the game, it kind of helps build that feel, build that tone of paranoia and of lies and deceit that a good espionage game really wants to have. So when you're in a conversation with somebody, you're trying to conceal your true nature and your true intentions as best you can, because as soon as they figure out that you're an enemy, they'll say strike, they'll get to shoot first, and you might end up dead. So it feels like a really bloody system might turn it into a combat. The opposite is true. A really bloody system takes it a little bit away from a combat game. Combats and gunfights will definitely still happen. In fact, a gunfight in this game is called a mass murder because of how bloody they can be. But because of the nature of the system, it does incentivize you to tell a really good paranoid espionage, low combat game in general. So now that you understand the basic rules of the game, I want to talk about agencies and characters. Agencies, every group of players belongs to an agency. Whether this is something like the circus in the Smiley novels by John le Carre, or whether it's just a generic, this is FBI, or something like Treadstone in the Bourne movies. Whatever it is, your agency, your specific group that you work for, has its own flavor and its own stuff. And so you will start a campaign or a single session by defining who your agency is. And this is a very quick, simple, minimalist process that creates a lot of cool flavor. Basically, an agency has a director, and you can give your director one of 6 different stats that is going to help define like the focus. Same with a virtue. Each agency has a virtue. And so once you figure out as a group what your director is and what your virtue is, then you know the overall kind of tone and tenor of this agency. Is it something that focuses on violence, on lies, on gear, on cleverness? There's a lot of different options that you can have. Then there are assets, and there's a bunch of different assets in the game. And by assets, I refer to something like, do we have our own hospital? Do we have our own Q branch? Do we have our own whatever other thing, right? And each player in the group gets to pick one asset out of a list. And so do you have a big archive? Well, if one of the players wants, then you do. This is also kind of how aspects work. An aspect is kind of like a trait. So let me give you an example. Each agency is going to have 4 aspects. And the aspect is going to be something like, for example, honeypot. And every aspect has both an invoke and a compel, which is kind of a good thing and a bad thing. So honeypot. Invoke. The agents of your agency are beautiful, cunning, and deadly. Dashing, dangerous, and sly. Gain 3 dice for any seduction risk, regardless of your character's gender. So if you want to be kind of that James Bondy, seducing people kind of thing, then this can be one of the 4 aspects that your agency has. But it can be used against you because there is a compel, which in this case says, A charmer is always lured by charms. You often succumb to similar advances. And so every time you pick an aspect, it's going to add, again, more flavor and an actual mechanical benefit to all the agents of that agency, but it is also going to kind of become a weakness. Every aspect has both sides to it. And so the more you specialize in something, the more that specialty can be used against you. Then you've got a reputation, which doesn't have any direct mechanics, and secrets, which also don't really have any direct mechanics, but they help, again, add flavor to it. Just like with assets, every player in the game every player in the campaign gets to add one secret to your agency. And that could be something like, we have a mole. You don't know who that mole is, but you know because you established it in the beginning that there is one. And that might make you more paranoid or less trusting of your fellow agents. So there you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things. Once you've defined those 6 things, you know your agency and you kind of know what kind of campaign you'll be getting into, what it's going to shape up like and what it's going to taste like. Then it's time to develop agents. Agents are a little more complicated. They get a name and a code name, and these actually can have mechanical effects. If you're trying to do a risk that relates directly to the meaning behind your name or to the cool code name you've given yourself, then you'll be better at it. Think of this almost like a G.I. Joe idea that, if your code name is, something to do with hacking, then when you try to take a hacking test, you'll be better at it because that's your code name, right? It's a neat system. It only adds like 1 die, but it is another thing that helps add a lot of flavor and shape to your game and to your character specifically. Then there is role. And the role is the closest thing that this game has to a character class. And the roles are things like accountant, analyst, commander, counterintelligence, doctor, deputy director, freelancer, handler, hitter, mastermind, public relations, and security chief. Those are actually all of the roles in here. So let's say that you are a handler. You're an asset handler. That's the role you've chosen for yourself. Well, that's going to give you a bonus, an ability, and a benefit. So as you go through the game and it's time for an asset to be handled, you need to fool somebody, you need to bring somebody into the fold, you need to get information out of somebody, or you need to keep somebody away from the truth. Well, that's the asset handler's job. And so you're going to go in and you've got a couple of bonuses and things that are going to help you do that better, which is awesome. After you choose your role, then you get virtues. These are the same list as the virtues. There's 6 virtues. You chose one for your agency. You will kind of assign yourself a rank in all of them when it comes to your character. And some of those you will be very good at. One of them you will be terrible at, which is your weakness. And then similar with aspects. Every character gets 3 of the 4 aspects that their agency has. So you're not necessarily good at everything that the rest of your agents are. And so I like both of those because they do encourage your character to relate directly to your agency in some way. So if your agency is very good at, let's say, violence, which is one of the virtues, then you as a character will be even better at it, unless you choose that as a weakness, in which case you're kind of the weird outsider, and that's awesome. Then you get to choose a background for your character. Where did you come from? Did you join this intelligence agency out of the military? Did you come from civilian life? Did you come from somewhere else? There's a lot of little background packages that you can choose, and then within those, you'll get an advantage. Each character will get 2 advantages, one of which comes from their background and one of which just comes from anything. This will also help you choose a touchstone, which is something like a person that you trust or rely on. So like in the recent Mission Impossible movies, there's the woman that he loves, right? Ethan Hunt is in love with, I can't remember the character's name. The actress is Michelle Monaghan. And in the very most recent one, Fallout, she was directly threatened by the bad guys. And so that was a way to, incorporate your character's touchstone into the narrative, into the storytelling. So that's what the touchstone is for. Then you will define one other player character that your character trusts. You will give yourself a cover, again based on your background. Then you'll pick that last advantage, and you'll be ready to go. And so we have talked about how agencies and agents are created. And I am, later in this video, I'm going to show you examples of those that I have created in advance so you can see what they look like. But before I get into that, I want to finish talking about what this book includes, because it's got a lot of really great stuff. So first of all, it has a season system. This is similar in some ways to like the Pendragon Winter phase, in which you will go through a whole adventure, and then at the end of the year, you will get to do some kind of broad campaign-based things, upgrade your stuff. So in Cold Shadows, what you do with seasons is you can give yourself extra assets, you can raise or lower your trust with other characters. There's a lot of options to do to kind of improve over time. The book also includes a big section on fighting styles, a big section on spyware and gear, and I mean, at least half of the book is kind of just game advice, storytelling advice on how to use espionage, how to tell a good spy story, how to use things like the Cold War or paranoia or deceit, mystery, all of those things. The game doesn't actually have a specific setting other than Earth, but even that you could use this for anything. It is setting agnostic in a way, but what you can just kind of choose. I want this to be a Cold War game based in, Berlin, or based in Chile, or based in somewhere else. Or you could say, I want this to be a more modern game, something like the Night Manager that's dealing with kind of modern day arms dealing and stuff like that. So there's a lot of options, and the game will allow you to do any of them, which is great. The last thing that the game has is there's actually several different modes of play. What I've been describing is the very basic kind of stale beer mode. There is a narrator, there's a bunch of players, you're telling a story, and you go. There's also an entire chapter on solitaire play, on how to do this just with one person, which is really cool. And then there are 3 what they call Martini modes, shaken, stirred, and on the rocks. And so if you want to do something that is kind of more directly combative, think of these almost as PvP modes, where you've got 2 agencies fighting against each other, or something like Jason Bourne or the Alias TV show, where agents are directly fighting their own directors who they have learned to be corrupt, or something like that. So if you want to do that kind of story, this game can handle it, and it's really, really fascinating. Okay, so the book's got a lot of great stuff like that, a lot of great options. Virtually any kind of spy story you want to tell, Cold Shadows can tell in a really great way. Now, I promised that I had some kind of agent and agency stuff pre-built to show off what the game is able to do. Okay? I have based these on my book Ghost Station that I talked about in the beginning. Ghost Station is set in Berlin in 1961, just 2 months after the wall goes up. And a main character is a cryptographer who works in a listening station. And he and his friends, oh my gosh, this is almost unwatchably bad. He and his friends are trying to figure out, first of all, what's going on with this wall, what's going on with East Berlin and the Stasi and the East German government in general, which is called the GDR. And there's also, I won't get into the rest of it, I don't want to spoil it. It's Cold War cryptographers. So their listening station is called the Cabin. And so I built the Cabin using the Cold Shadows rules. The director is a man named Chief Davis, and his kind of defining trait is paranoid, which means that he and the agents who work for him are always worried about moles. They're always worried about who they can trust. It means it's very difficult for them to trust anybody. The virtue that that this agency prizes above all else is intellect. They are mostly academics. They don't really go into the field very often. And so intellect is going to be their key thing, and the agents are going to be very good at it. Their main assets, they have a ConOps station, which is the cabin itself. They have an archives. They have comment, which is this communications thing. It's very easy for them to intercept enemy communications. That's the entire job of a listening station. And then they have some non-government connections that they can talk to people. They have contacts and things like that. So those are the assets that this agency has to draw on. The aspects that I chose for them are don't trust the dossier, even the grave can't hide secrets, flip the enemy, and friends in the dark. All of those are kind of centered around this concept of gathering and using information. There's a lot of other aspects that they could have had, which would lead them to be, more combative. Teamwork is an aspect that could have fit for this agency, but given that their director is paranoid, I didn't want to give them teamwork because it's very difficult for them to work together. They don't necessarily trust even each other. Their reputation of the cabin is our agency knows everything before it happens. These are not defined by the game. You can just make up anything you want. And it doesn't really have a game function. It won't give you extra dice or whatever. But it helps define who you are and how everyone knows things about you, what the NPCs are likely to know about you. Then last of all, the secrets. Their secret is we have a double agent in the Stasi. The Stasi have a double agent with us. Some of our agents are former Nazis, which was very true of all of the Western intelligence agencies in Europe in the 1960s. And then the top brass are suspicious of us. They suspect that there might be a spy within the cabin. And so that actually is a fantastic recreation of the agency in Ghost Station. And I love the way that I could have used this same system to create, something much more violent, something much more focused on field work, something much more focused in lots of different areas. And so it's very simple. It's just not even a full page here. It's like a quarter of a page, but it gives a lot of flavor and it helps focus the agency and the campaign. Next, I built, using the agent rules in Cold Shadows, I built Wallace Reid, who is the main character of my book, Ghost Station. He doesn't actually have a code name in the book, but I gave him one because you need one for this. So his code name is Numbers. So if he is dealing with any risk that involves math, then he's going to get a slight bonus to that. And his actual name is just Wallace Reid, which is his real name. The game lets you choose a meaning for your fake name, and the fact that he chose his real name, he just operates under his real name, means that his trait is honesty, that he is not trying to conceal who he is. And so if something ever pops up in the game where honesty matters, he'll get some bonus dice because of how he was named. His role is an analyst. He's a cryptographer, and that kind of falls under the umbrella of analyst, and so he gains the analyst powers. His virtues, you get 4 in 1, 3 in 2 of them, 2 in 2 of them, and then one of them is a weakness, in which you don't get any ranks at all. And so the 6 virtues are charisma, and he has 2 ranks, resolve 3, perception 3, violence is his weakness. He's not good at it. He's a nerd who likes to sit behind a desk. Athleticism 2, and then intellect 4. But because that is also the virtue of his agency, he gets a bonus, so his intellect is 5. So any risk he takes that is going to involve intelligence, he's going to be very, very good at, which makes sense for a cryptographer who works at a listening station. The aspects he gets to pick 3 of the agency's 4 aspects. The one he did not take was friends in the dark. He's not good at talking to people, and so he doesn't really have that one. But he does have flip the enemy, even the grave can't hide its secrets, and don't trust the enemy. So he's good at discovering information, and he is, on occasion, good at dealing with enemy agents and other contacts. But he doesn't have the kind of jovial humor that friends in dark places would have given him. And that fits this character very well. He doesn't like talking to people, and he's not very good at it. His background is a civilian, which means his cover is as an academic. His touchstone is just his parents. And the person he trusts is one of the other people in the office, a woman named Lisa Kohler. And why he trusts Lisa more than anyone else in the office, you will have to read the book to discover. But it's a key part of his character, so whoopee. His advantages, he is lucky, and he is also the director's protege, which is a really great advantage in the Cold Shadows system that happens to apply perfectly to Wallace Reid, and is a big part of the storyline in the book. So anyway, that is, again, character sheet is relatively small and simple. If I were going to actually play with this, I would have taken the analyst role and I would have written out what his actual benefits and things are from that role. But even then, it wouldn't be much larger than this little piece of paper, this kind of 5x8 thing. Character generation is very simple. It's very quick. You can actually sit down, and I've done this at conventions. You sit down with the book, you hand everyone a piece of paper and a pen. You can create your agency in about 10 minutes. You can create your characters in about 10, 20 more minutes, and then play an entire session of the game over the next couple of hours. Fantastic, minimalist narrative system. Cold Shadows is a really great game from a wonderful publishing company, and in my experience, the best espionage-based game out there. With the different modes that it has, Solitaire and Martini and all these other things, you can really cover any kind of spy story. If you want to do something that is very stale beer like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, you can. If you want to do something that's a lot more action-packed like The Bourne Identity, you absolutely can. If you want to do something that is based entirely on emotions and paranoia, like something like The Little Drummer Girl, you absolutely can. If you want to do that, but with a lot more action involved, like Alias, you absolutely can. Cold Shadows is versatile. It is fast playing. It is simple. It is innovative. It's a wonderful game. It's also very affordable. So go grab yourself a copy and give it a try. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you on my next review.